My name is Raymond Bishop. I'm 67 years old and my hands are calloused from a lifetime of hard work. Last Tuesday, my only son slapped me. He pushed and shoved me nearly 20 times in the house I bought for him. But it wasn't the sting on my cheek that broke my heart. It was the cold, satisfied smile on his wife's face as she watched it happen. They thought they had broken an old man. They thought they had won. They didn't know that the very foundation they were standing on was about to turn to dust, all with a single signature from the man they disrespected. Before I tell you how I took back everything, let me know in the comments where you're listening to my story from. And please hit that like and subscribe button if you believe that a parent's love should never be mistaken for weakness. That night, the physical pain in my cheek had faded, but a deeper ache had settled into my bones. I didn't go to my own empty house. Instead, I found myself driving to the quiet stillness of the cemetery where my Diane rests. The moon cast long shadows across the grass, and I sat down, the dampness seeping into my jeans. From my worn leather wallet, I pulled out the picture I always carry. It's faded at the edges, soft from years of being touched. It's Diane. Her smile as bright as the summer sun on the day we first opened our little construction business. We called it Bishop & Sons Construction, even though we didn't have any sons back then. It was a name built on hope. I spoke to her picture, my voice a rough whisper in the night air. I'm sorry, my love. I think I spoiled our boy rotten. Diane and I, we came from nothing. I was a carpenter with splintered hands, and she was a nurse working the graveyard shift. We saved every penny, every dime. We worked until our bodies screamed for rest, all so that Andre could have a better start than we did. We didn't want him to know the gnawing hunger of a lean week or the chill of a room with poor heating. Andre was our whole world. He got his first car at 16. He got a trip to Europe when he graduated college. He got everything we never dared to dream of for ourselves. I can still feel the frail touch of her hand in mine on her last night. Her breath was shallow, but her eyes were still full of love. Ray, she had whispered, promise me, you'll always look after Andre. Don't let him be alone. And I promised. For years I kept that promise with a blind devotion. I thought loving him meant giving him everything, shielding him from every hardship. I gave him a life without struggle, and in doing so I had raised a man who was weak, a man who could raise his hand to his own father. I had been so focused on giving our son all the things I never had that I forgot to teach him the values that I did have. Respect, gratitude, the simple dignity of a hard day's work. Our company was built on sweat and sawdust. I was proud of that. But to Andre, my blue-collar roots were something to be embarrassed about. He wanted success that came in a slick package in expensive suits and shiny business cards. He wanted the reward, but he looked down on the labor. Sitting there in the quiet darkness, I finally admitted to myself that I had failed my promise to Diane. I had cared for Andre's comfort, his wants, his lifestyle, but I had neglected his character. And to truly honor my wife now, to protect the very legacy she helped me build, I had to do the one thing I never wanted to do. I had to teach my son what it felt like to lose everything. 5 years ago, I thought my life was complete. Andre announced he was getting married to Brittany. I was overjoyed. Brittany was a beautiful, energetic white woman from a well-off family. I thought she would be a wonderful partner for my son. I thought together they would build a beautiful life. And to help them start, I decided to give them the greatest gift I could imagine, a home. It wasn't just any house. It was a magnificent 2-story colonial in a safe green suburb with a big backyard, perfect for the grandchildren I hoped to one day hold. I took a huge chunk of my retirement savings, the nest egg that Diane and I had worked our entire lives to build. I wanted to give them a solid foundation, a place they could truly be proud of. But even then, a small voice deep inside me, the voice of a 62-year-old man who had seen his share of the world, urged me to be cautious. I saw the way Brittany looked at Andre, not always with love, but with a sense of assessment of ownership. I saw how Andre changed around her, puffing up his chest a little more, becoming more concerned with appearances and easily swayed by her opinions. So I made an appointment with David Chen. David is my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense man who had handled my business contracts for over 2 decades. I told him my plan to buy the house for the kids, and he listened patiently, his face unreadable. When I finished, he leaned forward. Ray, that's a beautiful gift, but love must always be paired with wisdom. Marriage isn't what it used to be in our day. Things can change. I asked him what he meant. I have a proposal, he said, steepling his fingers. Instead of putting the house directly in Andre's name, let's place it in a revocable living trust. We'll call it the Diane Bishop Legacy Trust. I was confused, and David explained it in simple terms. Here's how it works. The trust legally owns the house. You, Ray, will be the sole trustee. That means you have complete control over the asset. Andre and Brittany will be the beneficiaries. They have the right to live in the house for as long as they want, just like a real homeowner. They can paint the walls, plant a garden, whatever, but they cannot sell it, mortgage it, or make any legal decisions about the property without your signature. And here is the most important part, David said, looking me straight in the eye. As the trustee, you retain the legal right to revoke the trust's asset, meaning you can sell the house at any time for any reason you see fit. I was silent for a long time. It felt deceptive. It felt like I didn't trust my own son. But David was right. This wasn't about control. It was about protection. Protecting Andre from his own impulsive nature. Protecting my life savings from a potential divorce. And most of all, protecting Diane's legacy. Protecting what we had built together from being squandered. Why call it the Diane Bishop Legacy Trust? I asked him. Because that's what this is, Ray. It's her legacy of love and sacrifice. The name will be a constant reminder of where this gift truly came from. So that's what we did. I told Andre it was a simple legal arrangement for tax purposes to protect the family's assets. He was so thrilled about the house that he didn't ask a single question. Brittany gave me a sweet smile, but I saw a flicker of something else in her eyes, a fleeting shadow of disappointment. Maybe she had been hoping for a gift with no strings attached. For 5 years, that trust was just a pile of papers in a safe deposit box. I never thought I would need to use it. I truly believed my son would grow into the man I had hoped he would be. I was wrong. The legal shield I had created to protect my son was now going to be the weapon I used to teach him the hardest lesson of his life. The signs were there all along, of course. They were like tiny cracks in a foundation. You ignore them at first, but they spread over time, threatening the entire structure. It started with words. Brittany had a way of delivering an insult wrapped in a compliment. One afternoon, I came over and saw a cabinet door hanging loose on its hinge. I got my toolbox from my truck to fix it. "Oh, Ray," she said with a bright, false smile, "you don't have to do that manual labor. Andre will call a handyman. We wouldn't want you to trouble yourself." She said the words manual labor like it was a dirty phrase, something beneath her. And Andre, instead of defending the work his father had done his whole life, would just chuckle and say, "Yeah, Dad, just relax." He didn't understand that for me, working with my hands wasn't a burden. It was my identity. Then came the money. Every few months, my phone would ring. "Hey, Dad, things are a little tight this quarter," Andre would begin. Brittany and I were looking at a new SUV. Her old one just doesn't feel safe anymore. I was wondering if we could borrow some money. Borrow was a polite word for take. I gave them the money, first for the car, then for a vacation to the Caribbean that Brittany claimed she needed for her mental health. I told myself I was helping them maintain a good life, but I knew the truth. I was funding a lifestyle they couldn't afford, an illusion of wealth propped up by my retirement fund. Slowly, I began to feel like an intruder in the very house I had paid for. Brittany established new rules. "Ray, it's best if you call before you come over from now on," she'd say sweetly. "You know, just so we can make sure we're presentable. We need our privacy." What privacy really meant was that I wouldn't be able to drop by unannounced and see the new designer bags or the expensive electronics they had just bought. One Saturday, I brought over a sweet potato pie, Andre's favorite since he was a boy. I found him in the living room struggling to assemble a new bookshelf. He was clearly doing it wrong. I gently offered a piece of advice. "Son, you should use wall anchors for drywall. Otherwise, that thing will come right down." Brittany looked up from her phone on the sofa, her expression annoyed. "Andre knows what he's doing, Ray. He's the man of this house." Her words were a slap in the face. The man of this house. She said it so easily as if it were a fact. Andre, his pride wounded, snapped at me. "I got it, Dad. You don't have to tell me how to do everything." A week later, of course, the bookshelf fell, taking a huge chunk of the wall with it. They had to hire a professional to fix it. I'm sure the bill somehow made its way back to me. It was 1,000 little cuts like this, 1,000 moments of being dismissed, devalued, and disrespected. Each time I would tell myself to be patient, that families have friction, that Andre still loved me. I was so afraid of conflict, so afraid of pushing my son away, that I allowed the disrespect to grow. I didn't see that I wasn't building a bridge to my son. I was digging a pit at my own feet. And the slaps on that terrible Tuesday were just the final push that sent me tumbling to the bottom. It was a Tuesday 2 weeks after the bookshelf incident. The air between us had been tense, and I thought maybe I could smooth things over. That's the thing about being a father, you're always willing to be the one to build the bridge, even if you weren't the one who burned it. I stopped by the grocery store and picked up a few things. I knew they liked a specific brand of coffee for Brittany and a ribeye steak for Andre. I figured I'd drop them off, a small gesture of peace. When I pulled into their driveway, neither of their cars were there. I figured they were still at work. I had a key to the house, one I'd had since the day I gave it to them, though I rarely used it without calling first. But I just wanted to leave the groceries in the fridge so they wouldn't spoil. I let myself in and placed the bag on the kitchen counter. The house was quiet, filled with expensive furniture that still looked like it belonged in a showroom. As I was about to leave, I glanced out the kitchen window into the backyard, and that's when I saw it. The outdoor faucet by the garden hose was dripping. Not just dripping, but leaking a steady, thin stream of water onto the flagstone patio, creating a dark, spreading puddle. My mind, the mind of a builder and a man who paid his own bills for 67 years, immediately started calculating. A leak like that could waste hundreds of gallons a month. That's a water bill that could easily jump by $50 or $60. It was money literally going down the drain. I shook my head. Andre probably hadn't even noticed. And if he had, he'd put off calling a plumber until the bill came, and then he'd probably call me to complain about the expense. A plumber would charge him $150 just to show up and replace a 10-cent washer. It was ridiculous. I walked back out to my old Ford truck. In the back, under a worn canvas cover, was my toolbox. It was old and heavy, filled with tools I'd had for decades, each one with a story. It felt good in my hand, familiar and right. For me, fixing something that's broken is as natural as breathing. It's my way of putting a little bit of order back into the world. It's how I show I care. The job took me all of 10 minutes. I turned off the water main, used my wrench to loosen the packing nut, replaced the worn-out rubber washer, and tightened everything back up. The leak stopped instantly. I stood up, wiping my greasy hands on a rag from my back pocket. I looked at the now silent faucet, then at the big, beautiful house. A feeling of quiet satisfaction washed over me. I had done a good thing. I had saved my son some money and solved a problem. It was a simple act of fatherly love. I smiled to myself, thinking they'd be pleased. I had no idea that this simple act of kindness was about to be twisted into an act of war. I had no idea that I had just fixed a leaky faucet, but I had also just lit the fuse to an explosion. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway and turned a genuine smile on my face. I expected Brittany to be pleased. A problem she didn't even know she had was already solved. But the woman who walked through the back patio door was not smiling. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, flickered from my face down to my grease-stained hands, and then to the neatly repaired faucet. Her posture stiffened. The smile she offered me was thin and sharp like a crack in a frozen lake. It didn't reach her eyes. "Ray," she said, her voice clipped, "I see you've been keeping yourself busy." There was no thank you, no warmth, just a cool assessment, as if she'd found the gardener trimming a hedge he wasn't supposed to touch. "Hey, Brittany," I said, trying to keep my own tone light. I noticed the faucet was leaking pretty bad, wasting a lot of water. I had my tools in the truck, so I just took care of it. No big deal. "I see," she said, placing her designer handbag on the kitchen island with a soft, deliberate click. She walked past me to the refrigerator, pulling out a bottle of sparkling water. She didn't look at me as she spoke. "Well, I do wish you would have called first. Andre and I had a plumber scheduled to come out tomorrow." I knew that was a lie. There was no plumber. It was a story invented on the spot to make my actions seem unnecessary, intrusive. It was a way to put me back in my place. Before I could even respond, she pulled out her phone, turned her back to me, and walked towards the living room, her voice changing as she dialed. It became softer, higher laced, with a delicate theatrical concern. She was performing, and I was the intended audience. "Hi, honey," she cooed into the phone. "How's your day going?" "Oh, that's good." A pause. I could hear the faint tinny sound of Andre's voice on the other end. "Listen, honey, don't be upset, but something's happened at the house." Her voice was now a perfect blend of weary and worried. I stood by the sink, frozen, as I listened to her expertly paint her masterpiece of manipulation. "Well, I just got home and your father is here." "Yes, in the house. I think he used his key. He's been working in the backyard." There were tools all over the patio when I pulled up. It's a bit of a mess. She sighed dramatically. He was fixing the outdoor faucet. I know he means well, you know how he is, but, honey, it's just a little embarrassing. Linda from next door was walking her poodle right when I got here. She saw him. What is she going to think? That we can't afford to call a professional, or worse, that my husband can't handle a simple repair in his own home? That was the first dagger. She wasn't just twisting my actions, she was aiming the blade directly at Andre's deepest insecurity, his desperate need to appear successful and competent. I could almost feel the poison dripping through the phone line. She listened for a moment, then her voice softened even more, dripping with fake sympathy. I know, honey. I know you can. You're the most capable man I know. That's what I tried to tell him. But you know your dad. He just takes over. It's like he doesn't see this as your house. It's like he still thinks he's in charge of everything and that you're still a little boy who can't do anything for himself. That was the second dagger, sharper than the first. She was framing my love as control, my help as a vote of no confidence in my own son. She was positioning me as a rival, a threat to Andre's authority in his own home. I just stood there, my hands hanging uselessly at my sides. The quiet satisfaction I had felt just minutes before had evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. I was watching a master puppeteer at work, and my son was the puppet on her strings. I saw the entire strategy laid bare. Undermine my relationship with Andre, isolate him, make him feel like he had to choose between his father and his wife, make him believe that standing up for her meant putting me down, and the most painful part was that it was working. She was quiet for a long moment, listening to Andre's rising anger on the other end of the line. I could imagine his face getting red, his jaw tightening. She had lit the fuse, and now she was just waiting for the explosion. Finally, she spoke one last time, her voice now calm, as if she were the reasonable one trying to de-escalate the situation she herself had created. Okay, honey, just drive safe. I'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, I love you too. She hung up the phone and turned to me, that same thin plastic smile back on her face. The concern in her voice was gone, replaced by a cool, triumphant gleam in her eyes. Andre is on his way home, she said, her tone breezy. He's had a bit of a stressful day at work. She knew exactly what she had done. And in that moment, I knew that the man who was about to walk through that door would not be my son. He would be her weapon. The sound of Andre's car was the first sign of the coming storm. He didn't pull into the driveway. He screeched into it, the tires protesting against the pavement. The car door didn't just close, it slammed with a percussive boom that seemed to shake the windows of the house. I instinctively braced myself, my hand resting on the kitchen counter. Brittany, however, looked up with a flicker of anticipation in her eyes. The front door burst open, and Andre stormed in. He wasn't just walking, he was marching, his shoulders squared and his face a thundercloud of manufactured rage. His eyes scanned the room and locked onto me, ignoring his wife completely. There was no greeting, no "Hi, Dad," just a raw, guttural accusation. "What the hell are you doing here?" he bellowed, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged kitchen. He threw his briefcase onto the floor, and the sound made me flinch. I kept my own voice low and steady, the way I used to when he was a teenager throwing a tantrum. "Son, calm down. I was just in the neighborhood, and I noticed the faucet outside was—" He cut me off with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand. "I don't care about the faucet. I don't care. I want to know why you are always in my house, in my business, treating me like I'm a child who can't handle his own life." His voice was getting louder, his face turning a deep, angry red. I could see Brittany in my peripheral vision. She had leaned back against the counter, crossing her arms, a silent spectator at the Coliseum waiting for the Lions. Her presence was a silent poison fueling his fire. "That's not what I was doing, Andre," I said, my voice still even. "I was saving you $150 on a plumber for a 10-minute job. It's called helping. It's what a father does. Helping!" He scoffed, taking a step closer. The air crackled with tension. "You call this helping? Or is it just another way to remind me, another way to hold this house over my head, to make sure I never forget that you're the one who paid for it, that I'm living on your charity?" His words were a torrent of accusations, a twisted version of every good thing I had ever tried to do for him. He was throwing my love back in my face, and it was clear these were not his own thoughts. They were words that had been carefully planted in his head, seeds of resentment that Brittany had been watering for years. I looked past him for a second at my daughter-in-law. She was watching him, her expression a careful mixture of concern and encouragement. She was urging him on with her eyes. I turned my attention back to my son. I had to try to make him see. Andre, this isn't about a faucet. This isn't about me. This is about her. I said, my voice dropping, nodding slightly towards Brittany. She is whispering poison in your ear, son. Can't you hear it? Can't you see what she's doing to us? It was the wrong thing to say. The truth was a spark on a trail of gasoline. The moment the words left my mouth, something in his eyes snapped. The last thread of reason broke. You will not. He seethed, his voice a low growl. Talk about my wife. He took the final step and shoved me hard with both hands against my chest. I stumbled back, my hip hitting the sharp edge of the kitchen counter. A jolt of pain shot up my side, but it was nothing compared to the shock. My son had just put his hands on me. It was like a dam had burst. The next few moments were a blur of violence and rage. He slapped my face, a hard, stinging blow that made my ear ring and my vision swim. You don't undermine me, he screamed. He shoved me again towards the sink. Not in my house. My back hit the cabinets. He grabbed the front of my shirt, his face inches from mine, his breath hot and smelling of stale coffee. His finger jabbed hard into my chest with every word. You think you're better than me? You always have. He pushed me away, then slapped me again on the other side of my face. It wasn't a fight. It was an assault. I didn't raise a hand to defend myself. How could I? This was my son, my boy. All I could do was stand there and take it, my mind reeling in disbelief. The man in front of me was a stranger, a vessel for a rage so profound it seemed to consume him. But then, through the ringing in my ears and the fog of shock, my eyes found Brittany. And what I saw broke me in a way the physical blows never could. She hadn't moved. She hadn't gasped. She hadn't cried out for him to stop. She was perfectly still, her arms still crossed. And on her face there was a small, subtle but unmistakable smile. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. Her eyes were cold, glittering with victory. She was watching the final, violent severing of the bond between father and son, a bond she had worked so hard to destroy. She was watching her project come to completion, and she was pleased. It was in that moment, watching her watch him, that my heart didn't just break, it shattered into a million pieces. The slaps hurt my face, the shoves bruised my body, but her smile burned a hole straight through my soul. He was the weapon, but she was the one pulling the trigger. The rage finally seemed to drain out of Andre, leaving him panting, his chest heaving. He stood there looking at me with a dawning confusion in his eyes, as if waking from a terrible dream. The silence that fell was deafening. I didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. I slowly, deliberately straightened my shirt. It was a small gesture, but it was mine. It was the only piece of dignity I had left in that moment. I looked from my son's trembling hands to my daughter-in-law's smug, victorious face. Then, without another word, I turned around and walked out the door, leaving them in the ruins of what used to be our family. When I walked out of that house, I left a part of myself behind forever. The part that made excuses. The part that absorbed disrespect in the name of peace. The part that believed love was a currency you could use to buy back a person's soul. As I drove away, my hands steady on the wheel, there were no tears. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a terrifying clarity. The pain in my cheek was a dull throb, a physical reminder of a much deeper wound. But in my heart, where there should have been a storm of grief and rage, there was only a profound and chilling calm. The debate was over. The decision had been made in the instant I saw that smile on Brittany's face. All that was left was the execution. That was when I had pulled my truck over my knuckles, white as I gripped my phone and made the call to David Chen. It was done. Back in that house, I knew a very different scene was playing out. I know my son, I know the weakness that runs through him, and I know the woman who expertly exploits it. I can hear their conversation in my head as clearly as if I were a fly on their expensive granite countertop. Andre would be pacing, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind a tremor of guilt and panic. Maybe I went too far, Britt, he'd say, running a hand through his hair. He's my dad. I hit him. And Brittany, ever the puppet master, would go to him, her touch soft, her voice a soothing balm of poison. Shh, honey, she would whisper, stroking his arm. He pushed you to it. You heard what he said about me. He was attacking our family. You were just defending us. You had to set a boundary. She'd let that sink in, reframing his violent outburst as a noble act of protection. He's just being dramatic, she'd continue, her tone becoming dismissive. You know how he is. He'll go lick his wounds for a few days and then he'll call like nothing happened. He always does. He loves you too much to stay away for long. Just let him cool off. That's what they were counting on. They were counting on the man I used to be. The father who had forgiven every slight, paid for every mistake, and smoothed over every conflict. They saw my love not as a strength but as a weakness, a button they could press whenever they needed something. They believed my forgiveness was unconditional, a limitless resource they could draw from without consequence. They fundamentally misunderstood what they had done. They hadn't just angered me. They had erased the man they thought they knew. Their arrogance was the greatest gift they could have given me. It provided the perfect cover for the war I was about to wage. They were expecting the same old Ray to come knocking on their door with a peace offering. They had no idea I was about to serve them an eviction notice. The next morning I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. There was a faint purplish bruise blooming high on my left cheekbone, a souvenir from my own son. But the man looking back at me was not the same one from yesterday. The hurt was still there, a deep cold stone in my gut, but the confusion was gone. In its place was a resolve so absolute it felt like steel had replaced my spine. I put on a clean pressed shirt, the kind I used to wear for important business meetings, and drove to David Chen's office downtown. David's office was on the 12th floor of a glass and steel building a world away from the sawdust and drywall of my life. It was a space of quiet, orderly power. Law books lined one wall, and a large, sleek mahogany desk stood between us. David was a man who radiated competence. He was sharp, impeccably dressed, and had been my lawyer for over 20 years. He greeted me with a firm handshake, his eyes briefly flicking to the bruise on my face before settling on mine. He was too professional to ask, but he saw it. He led me to a leather chair, and after his assistant brought us coffee, he leaned forward, his expression serious. "Ray, your call last night was brief." He began, his voice calm and measured. "You said, 'It's time. Tell me what happened.'" I didn't give him the tearful, rambling story of a wounded father. I gave him the cold, hard facts of a client stating a case. I described the argument, the shoves, the slaps, and the hateful words, but most importantly, I described Brittany's smile. I explained it with the precision of an architect detailing a structural flaw. When I was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. David didn't offer empty sympathies. He simply nodded slowly, his expression grim. "I understand," he said. "And what is it you want to do?" "I want to sell the house, David," I said, my voice devoid of any hesitation. "I want them out, and I want to do it as quickly and as quietly as humanly possible." David swiveled his chair to a large filing cabinet behind him and pulled out a thick dark blue folder. On the front in crisp white letters were the words, "The Diane Bishop Legacy Trust." He opened it on his desk, the sound of the pages turning the only noise in the room. He put on his reading glasses and scanned a document for a moment. "All right, Ray," he said, looking up at me over the rims of his glasses. "Let's review. As we established 5 years ago, you are the sole grantor and trustee of this revocable living trust. The property is legally owned by the trust, not by Andre or his wife. According to Article 4, Section B," he ran his finger down the page, "you as trustee retain sole and absolute authority to manage, lease, sell, or otherwise dispose of any and all assets held by the trust without the consent or notification of the named beneficiaries. In plain English, Ray, you can sell that house tomorrow, and you don't have to tell them a thing until it's done." A wave of relief washed over me, but it was cold comfort. "Good," I said simply. David leaned back, taking his glasses off. He looked at me, not just as a lawyer to a client, but as a man who had known me for decades. "Ray, I have to ask, are you absolutely certain this is the final move? There's no coming back from this. We could send a formal warning. We could draft a behavioral contract they would have to sign to continue residing on the property. There are other options." "No," I said, my voice hard as stone. "No warnings, no contracts, no second chances." My son put his hands on me while his wife smiled. "For me, that door is now closed, locked, and bolted shut. They made their choice. Now I'm making mine." David held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded again, a look of understanding on his face. The time for counseling was over. It was time for strategy. "All right," he said, his tone shifting back to pure business. "Then speed and finality are our primary objectives. A traditional sale is out of the question. Listing it, showing it, waiting for a buyer to get mortgage approval, that could take 2 or 3 months. It's messy, and it gives them time to make noise to try and challenge the trust in court. They would lose, but it would be a draining public spectacle. So what's the alternative, I asked. A cash buyer, David said instantly. We find a real estate investment firm or a developer. Someone who can see the value in the property and can close the deal with their own funds in a matter of days, not months. The process is clean, fast, and airtight. The only potential downside is that for that kind of speed, we might have to sell it for a few percentage points below the absolute top market value. I almost laughed. David, I said, leaning forward, you could tell me we had to sell it for half of what it's worth. I wouldn't care. The money is not the point. The message is the point. A flicker of a smile touched David's lips. I thought you might say that. I have a few contacts who specialize in exactly this kind of transaction. Reputable people. They will be discreet. I'll make some calls this afternoon. The biggest hurdle will be arranging a walkthrough for the prospective buyer without tipping off Andre and Brittany. My mind was already working, fitting the pieces together. The plan was no longer just an angry impulse. It was becoming a tangible logistical reality. It felt strange sitting in this quiet professional office, calmly planning to dismantle a life I had built with so much love. For a brief moment, I thought of Diane. What would she think of this? And the answer came to me as clear as day. She would have been heartbroken by what Andre had become, but she would have stood right by my side. She never tolerated disrespect. She would have expected me to protect our legacy and to protect my own dignity. This wasn't an act of vengeance. It was an act of preservation. Don't worry about the walkthrough, I told David, my voice steady. I'll handle that part. I have an idea. David closed the blue folder. The quiet click of the clasp echoed in the room. It sounded like the cocking of a gun. Okay, Ray, he said. I'll make the calls. I expect to have some options for you to review by the end of the day tomorrow. I stood up and shook his hand. It was a firm, solid handshake, an agreement between two men who understood the gravity of the situation. As I walked out of his office and into the bright afternoon sun, I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like a general who had just committed his troops to a necessary but painful battle. The silent war had officially begun. The day after my meeting with David, I sat in my small kitchen, the quiet hum of the old refrigerator, the only sound. I held my phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over Andre's name. This was going to be the hardest performance of my life. I had faced down angry union reps, stubborn inspectors, and 1,000 other job site crises with a steady voice and a firm will. But now I had to do the opposite. I had to become the man they thought I was: weak, defeated, and remorseful. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and thought of every time I had let a disrespectful comment slide, every time I had swallowed my pride for the sake of a fragile peace. I channeled that feeling of weary resignation, let my shoulders slump, and pressed the call button. It rang 3 times before he picked up. What he answered, his voice flat and cold. There was no hello, no dad, just a single impatient word. I let out a shaky breath, a calculated sound of defeat. Son. Andre. I started my voice intentionally hoarse. It's me. The silence on the other end was heavy, filled with his smug satisfaction. I know who it is, he finally said. What do you want? This was it. The performance began. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, I said, letting my voice crack just a little. I had no right to say what I did about Brittany. It wasn't my place. I was out of line. I hated every word that came out of my mouth. Each one felt like a betrayal of my own dignity, but it was a necessary poison I had to swallow. I could almost hear the smirk in his voice. Yeah, you were Dad. You were way out of line. He was enjoying this, the feeling of his old man groveling. He was taking the bait completely. I know, I said meekly. I know. I think it's best if I give you and Brittany some space for a while. I get it. I paused, letting the feigned submission hang in the air before delivering the crucial line. There's just one thing. There's an old box up in the attic storage. It's a box of your mom's things. Some of her old photo albums, the letters we wrote when I was stationed overseas, little things. I let my voice fill with genuine emotion now because this part was true. With everything that's happened, I feel like I need to have those things with me right now. I was wondering, would it be okay if I stopped by tomorrow, maybe midday, when you're both at work, just to pick it up? I swear I'll be in and out in 5 minutes. You won't even know I was there. There was another pause. He was considering it, weighing his newfound power. By granting my request, he would be cementing his position as the one in control, the magnanimous victor. The key is still under the mat, I added, making myself sound even more pathetic. Yeah, fine, whatever, Dad, he said, his tone dismissive. He had granted the request of a broken old man. Just be quick about it. He hung up without saying goodbye. I stared at the phone, a bitter taste in my mouth. The first part of the mission was a success. He suspected nothing. The next day I pulled my truck up to the curb a block away from the house, just as I had the day of the assault. But this time I wasn't a victim. I was an infiltrator on a mission. I walked up the familiar driveway, my footsteps echoing in the quiet suburban street. I retrieved the key from under the mat, the cold metal a familiar weight in my palm. The lock turned with a soft click, and I stepped inside for what I knew would be the very last time. The air inside was different. It smelled faintly of Brittany's expensive floral perfume, a scent that had always been too strong, too eager to announce its presence. It had completely erased the faint, comforting smell of wood polish and Diane's baking that used to linger in these walls. The house was silent, a museum of their life. I walked through the living room, my work boots feeling out of place on their plush, cream-colored carpet. I looked at the spot where I had taught a 3-year-old Andre how to build a tower of wooden blocks. Now a sleek glass coffee table sat there, holding a stack of glossy magazines. I found myself drifting into the kitchen. My eyes were drawn to the spot by the counter where I had stood where my son had assaulted me. I reached out and touched the cool, hard granite, and a shiver ran through me. This was the heart of the crime. This room, which had once been the center of our family life, filled with the laughter of my wife and the chatter of my young son, had been desecrated. It was now just a crime scene. With a heavy heart, I turned and headed for the narrow staircase that led to the attic. The air grew warmer and smelled of dust and old memories as I ascended. The attic storage was a small, cramped space under the eaves filled with things they deemed not stylish enough for the main house. And there, in the back corner, was what I had come for. It was a dark green metal lockbox, the kind my father used to keep his important papers in. It was heavy. I carried it downstairs to the kitchen table, the very table Andre and Brittany used for their fancy brunches. I pulled a small key from my pocket, a key that had been on my key ring for over 30 years, and opened the lock. The contents were my entire life. On the top layer were the things I had used as my excuse. A stack of letters tied with a faded red ribbon that Diane had written to me when I was a young soldier. Her handwriting was a beautiful flowing script. Beneath them were the photo albums. I saw a picture of Diane radiant on our wedding day, a picture of me young and proud holding a tiny sleeping Andre in my arms, a picture of the three of us on the steps of this very house on the day we moved in, so full of hope. A single hot tear escaped my eye and fell onto the plastic covering a photo of Diane smiling. I quickly wiped it away. This was not the time for grief. This was a time for justice. I carefully lifted the top layer of albums, and there it was. Lying flat on the bottom of the box was the thick, dark blue folder. I opened it. The crisp official pages of the Diane Bishop Legacy Trust stared back at me, my signature and Diane's signature clear and strong at the bottom of the founding document. All the power, all the authority, it was all right here. I had come for a box of memories, tangible pieces of a past they had tried to erase. But I was leaving with the keys to their future. I placed the folder in my jacket pocket, then carefully put the photos and letters back in the box. I closed the lid, the click of the latch echoing in the silent house. It was a sound of finality. I picked up the box, my legacy in my arms, and walked out the front door without looking back. I didn't bother to put the key back under the mat. They wouldn't be needing it anymore. David Chen was as good as his word. The next afternoon he called me. Ray, I have a potential buyer, a serious one. They're a real estate investment group called Phoenix Holdings. They specialize in acquiring properties quickly with cash for their rental portfolio. They're discreet and they don't waste time. They've seen the public records, the property assessment, and they're very interested. But they need one thing, a 30-minute walkthrough. Can you make that happen? The moment of truth had arrived. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my voice was calm when I responded. Leave it to me, David. I'll set it up for tomorrow. Once again, I had to pick up the phone and call my son. This time, my performance required a different character. Not the remorseful father, but the responsible, slightly boring old man concerned with paperwork. When Andre answered, his tone was still cool, but the overt hostility was gone. In his mind, I had been put in my place. "What is it now, Dad?" he asked, a sigh of impatience in his voice. "Just a quick heads up, son," I said, my voice flat and businesslike. "My lawyer is updating my estate planning, and since the house is the main asset in my trust, the appraiser needs to do a quick valuation for their records. It's just a formality for tax purposes. They'll need about 20 minutes to walk through and take some pictures. I told them you're busy, so I'll meet them there tomorrow around 1 p.m. You won't even have to be there." It was the perfect excuse. Words like estate planning, tax purposes, and appraiser are so profoundly boring that they kill all suspicion. It sounded like a tedious errand an old man would have to deal with. Yeah, whatever Andre said, clearly uninterested. Just make sure they don't make a mess. He had no idea he was casually giving permission for the sale of his own home. The next day at 1 o'clock sharp, I met a man named Mr. Davis in the driveway. He was the agent for Phoenix Holdings. He was in his 40s, dressed in a sharp suit, and had an air of quiet efficiency. He wasn't here to admire the rose bushes. He was here to assess an asset. I unlocked the door and let him in. For 20 minutes he moved through the house with a practiced eye. He took photos on his tablet, measured a few walls, checked the water pressure in the bathrooms, and looked at the foundation in the basement. He didn't comment on the expensive furniture or the personal photos on the walls. He was looking at the bones of the house, the investment. I simply followed him, a silent shadow in my own past. It was one of the most surreal experiences of my life, playing the role of a cooperative homeowner while secretly selling the property out from under its occupants. As we were leaving, Mr. Davis turned to me. "We can make you an offer within the hour," he said. "All cash. We can close in 3 business days." An hour later, as I sat in my truck in a nearby park, my phone buzzed. It was an email from David. The offer was in. As he had predicted, it was about 5% under what the house might have gotten in a hot market, but it was a solid, clean number. There were no conditions, no contingencies, no delays. I called David immediately. "I got the offer," I said, and he asked. "It's perfect," I replied. "Tell them we accept." 3 days later, I was sitting in David Chen's quiet, temperature-controlled office. The contrast between this calm, professional environment and the emotional chaos that had led me here was staggering. There was a stack of documents in front of me. I spent 30 minutes signing my name over and over again. Raymond Bishop, trustee. Each signature felt heavier than the last. I wasn't just signing papers. I was ending a chapter of my life. I was severing a bond. David's paralegal acted as the notary, stamping each page with a satisfying final thud. When it was all done, David slid a piece of paper across the desk to me. It was a confirmation of a wire transfer. A very large sum of money had just been deposited into the account of the Diane Bishop Legacy Trust. There was no champagne, no celebration, just the quiet hum of the office air conditioner and that piece of paper in my hand. It was done. The house I had bought with a heart full of love had just been sold with a heart full of resolve. I had surgically removed a cancer. The operation was a success. Now all that was left was to inform the patient. I didn't have to be there to see it. After years of watching my son, I knew his habits, his mannerisms, his exact brand of arrogance. I can picture him now sitting in his sterile office on the 4th floor of some soulless corporate building. He would be leaning back in his chair, a chair that probably cost more than my first car, scrolling through sports highlights on his phone while pretending to read an important report on his computer screen. He would feel secure, important, untouchable. The world was his, a playground built for his amusement, and he never once thought about the man who had paid for the swings and the slide. That was his fatal mistake. He saw my love as an entitlement, but he never bothered to read the fine print. Around 3 p.m., an email would have chimed in his inbox. The subject line would have been so boring, so utterly mundane, that he would have almost deleted it without a second thought. HOA Community Welcome Notice. He'd probably let out an annoyed sigh, thinking it was just another reminder about lawn maintenance or recycling bins. But for some reason, maybe a flicker of boredom, he would have clicked it open. I can see his eyes scanning the first line, his brow furrowed in mild confusion. On behalf of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association, we would like to extend a warm welcome to the new owners of 124 Chestnut Lane Phoenix Holdings. He would have stopped right there. He'd have reread the sentence, 124 Chestnut Lane. His address. New owners. Phoenix Holdings. The words wouldn't compute. His first reaction would be a dismissive laugh. A typo. The incompetent volunteers at the HOA probably mixed up the house numbers. He'd probably take a screenshot and send it to Brittany with a sarcastic caption like, "Guess we've been replaced." LOL. He would have tried to go back to his sports highlights, but the words would be stuck in his head, a splinter in his mind. A cold, prickling unease would begin to creep up his spine. Phoenix Holdings. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but he wouldn't be able to place it. Just to prove to himself it was a mistake, he would have opened a new tab on his browser and navigated to the county's public property records website. The page would load slowly each second, stretching out, feeding his growing anxiety. When the record for his address finally appeared, it wouldn't say Phoenix Holdings. It would say the owner was the Diane Bishop Legacy Trust. This would only deepen his confusion. He knew about the trust, of course, in that vague, dismissive way he knew about all the boring financial things I handled. He saw it as a technicality, a name on a piece of paper. He never, not for 1 second, considered its true meaning or its power. He thought it was a shield to protect him, not a cage he was living in. Annoyance was now turning into a knot of genuine concern in his stomach. He needed to clear this up. He needed to hear someone tell him it was all a stupid clerical error. He would have found the phone number for Phoenix Holdings in the email signature. He'd dial, tapping his expensive pen on his desk, rehearsing the annoyed, important man with no time for this nonsense tone he was about to use. I can hear his side of the conversation perfectly. "Yes, hello," he would start, his voice laced with authority. "My name is Andre Bishop. I'm calling about a property at 124 Chestnut Lane. I received a rather confusing email from our HOA, and I believe your company may be involved in the error." He would listen for a moment, his posture confident. Then I imagined the change would begin. The subtle straightening of his back, the way his knuckles would turn white as he gripped the pen. The professional, calm voice on the other end of the line would not be confused. It would be clear, concise, and utterly devastating. "Yes, Mr. Bishop, we see the record here," the voice would say. "The acquisition of 124 Chestnut Lane was finalized this morning. It was an all-cash transaction." Andre's own voice would become a little strained. That's not possible. There must be a mistake. I am the resident. The house is not for sale. I understand your confusion, sir," the voice on the phone would continue, polite and unshakable. "But our records are quite clear. The property was sold to us by the legal owner, the trust. The transaction was executed by the sole trustee, a Mr. Raymond Bishop." And there it would be. The final fatal blow. The moment the world fell out from under his feet. I can see his face, the blood draining from it, leaving behind a pasty gray mask of shock. His mouth would be slightly open, no sound coming out. The expensive pen would slip from his numb fingers and clatter onto the polished surface of his desk. He wouldn't even notice. The voice on the phone might say something else, ask if he was still there, but he wouldn't hear it. All he would hear is the thunderous crash of his life imploding. The house was gone, and his father, his old, quiet, pushover father, had been the one to light the dynamite. I let the shock from that phone call settle in his mind for a full 5 minutes. I wanted him to be swimming in that cold sea of panic, to understand that this was not a mistake, that this was real. Then, and only then, did I deliver the final personal blow. I picked up my phone, my fingers steady, and typed out a short, simple message. There was no anger in it, no emotion at all. It was as cold and impersonal as a legal notice, which I suppose is exactly what it was. The message read, "The house has been sold. As per the new owner's agreement, all personal belongings must be removed within 72 hours. After that, they will be considered abandoned property and will be disposed of." I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. I hit send, and I could almost feel the shockwave travel from my phone to his. That text message would have been the trigger that launched him from a state of frozen shock into pure animalistic panic. The 72-hour deadline was a ticking time bomb, transforming a terrible situation into an immediate, terrifying crisis. I imagine he didn't even gather his things from his desk. He would have just bolted, his heart pounding in his chest, fumbling for his car keys. His first call would have been to Brittany. His voice a frantic, choked whisper. "He sold it, Britt. He sold the house. We have to get out. We have 72 hours. The ensuing conversation and the argument that would have consumed their entire drive home must have been spectacular. The carefully constructed facade of their perfect, supportive marriage would have been ripped to shreds in an instant, revealing the ugly, rotten core of their relationship. All the pretense was gone, replaced by raw, frantic blame. "This is your fault," Andre would have screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You're the one who told me to stand up to him. You're the one who said he was controlling us. You stood there and smiled while I did what I did. You told me he would just get over it." He would be throwing her own poisonous words back in her face, his accusations dripping with the bitter taste of his own weakness. But Brittany would never accept blame. Her survival instinct was too strong, her contempt for him too deep. She would have fired back, her voice like a shard of ice. "My fault," she would shriek. "Don't you dare put this on me. You're the one who acted like a thug. You're the one who hit an old man, and you're the one who was too stupid, too lazy to ever understand your own finances. I thought I married a man, not a little boy who was still living in his daddy's house." A real man would have owned his own home by now. Her attack would be surgical, aimed directly at every single one of his insecurities. She would strip him bare, exposing him as the weak, entitled child he had become under her influence. By the time they both arrived at the house, they wouldn't be a couple. They would be two cornered animals, snarling and snapping at each other, trapped in the cage of their own making. Amid the chaos and the screaming, one of them, probably Brittany, would have had the desperate idea to call a lawyer. Their last hope. They would have found some family law attorney online, paying an exorbitant fee for an emergency consultation. I can picture them on speakerphone in their perfect living room, talking over each other, frantically explaining the situation to a lawyer who was likely just trying to follow their hysterical story. They would be talking about trusts and fathers and slaps and eviction notices. Finally, the lawyer, after a few moments of silence to look up the public records, would have delivered the final dispassionate verdict. "Mr. and Mrs. Bishop," the lawyer's calm voice would say, cutting through their panic like a surgeon's scalpel. "I've just reviewed the preliminary records for the trust associated with your property. It appears to be an ironclad, revocable living trust. The trustee, your father, had every legal right to sell the property without your consent. I'm very sorry, but from a legal standpoint, you have no recourse. You are effectively tenants and you have been served notice to vacate. My professional advice to you is to start packing." And with those words, the fight would have drained out of them, replaced by a hollow, terrifying silence. The shouting would stop. The blaming would stop. All that was left was the stark, brutal reality of their situation. I imagine them standing there in the middle of their beautifully decorated living room, surrounded by the expensive furniture, the art on the walls, the whole curated illusion of their successful life. And for the first time, they would see it all for what it truly was, a stage set. A temporary illusion they had never truly owned. A world built on a foundation of my love and hard work. And I had just pulled that foundation out from under them. They were in free fall, and they had just realized there was no safety net. I knew they would find me. There was only one place I would go, a place that was more home to me now than any building. It was a small, quiet lake north of the city, a place where Diane and I used to go on Sunday afternoons. We'd sit on an old wooden bench under a willow tree and watch the sun set, talking about our dreams. After she was gone, it became my sanctuary. I was sitting on that same bench, looking out at the calm, gray water, when I heard their car skid to a stop in the gravel lot behind me. I didn't turn around. I had waited for this. I was ready. Their footsteps were a frantic, angry crunching of gravel. They stopped a few feet behind me, their ragged breathing cutting through the peaceful evening air. The first wave to hit me was the storm of rage. "How could you?" Andre screamed, his voice raw and shaking. "How could you do this to us, to your own son? After everything I did, everything, you just throw us out on the street like we're garbage. Are you happy now? Are you satisfied?" Brittany's voice was a venomous hiss, sharper and more piercing than his. "You are a sick, vindictive old man. You were always jealous of us, weren't you? You couldn't stand to see Andre happy with me. You couldn't stand that he didn't need his daddy anymore. I hope you enjoy being all alone with your precious money, because that's all you're going to have left." They threw every insult they could think of at my back. They called me a monster, a tyrant, a bitter, lonely old man. And through it all, I said nothing. I just kept my eyes fixed on the water, on the last shimmering rays of sunlight dancing on the surface. My silence was a wall they couldn't break. It was a mirror reflecting their own ugly hysteria back at them, and it infuriated them more than any argument could. Their anger had no power here. It was a fire with no oxygen. When they realized their rage was useless, the storm broke and the flood of tears began. The shift was as sudden as it was pathetic. Brittany was the first to crack. Her voice, which had been so full of venom, shattered into a series of theatrical sobs. "Ray, please," she cried, her tone now pleading. "Please don't do this to us. We're sorry. Andre is so sorry. He didn't mean it, you know. He didn't. He was just stressed. We'll do anything. We can't lose our home. It's all we have. Please, think of Diane. What would she think if she saw this?" Using my wife's name was her last, most desperate gambit, but the name that used to be my greatest weakness was now the source of my strength. Andre, seeing his wife's new tactic, quickly followed suit. His anger collapsed into the desperate whining of a child. "Dad, Dad, please," he begged, his voice thick with tears that I knew were for himself, not for me. I messed up. I know I did. I was a jerk. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'll get help. I'll go to therapy. I'll do anything you want. Just, please give me another chance. Please don't take our home away from us. I finally turned my head slowly and looked at them for the first time. I saw two desperate actors on a stage, their performance falling flat. I saw their tears, but I felt no pity. Their remorse wasn't real. It was the frantic panic of two people who had been evicted from their comfortable paradise and were terrified of the wilderness that lay ahead. And still, I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, letting them drown in their own manufactured sorrow. Finally, every ounce of anger and every fake tear had been spent. There was only one thing left. Andre looked at me, his face a mess of tears and confusion, and he asked the only question that mattered. His voice was no longer a man's. It was the small, lost voice of a little boy. Why I rose slowly from the bench, my old bones aching, but my spirit feeling stronger than it had in years. I stood before them not as a victim, but as the final judge in a trial they didn't even know they were a part of. I looked my son directly in the eye. My voice, when I finally spoke, was not loud. It was quiet, calm, and as heavy as a tombstone. You ask me why I began. You think this is about a slap. You think this is about a house. You are so much smaller than I ever let myself believe. I took a step closer. This was never about what you did in that one moment, Andre. It was about what you had become over 5 years. It's about every time you let your wife insult the work that fed you. It's about every phone call asking for money for a life you weren't earning. It's about every time you made me feel like an intruder in the home I built for you. You want to know the exact second you lost that house I let the question hang in the air. It wasn't when your hand struck my face. It was the second I looked over your shoulder and saw your wife's face. And she was smiling. That was the moment. The moment I realized you hadn't just lost your temper. You had lost your soul. I then turned my gaze to Brittany, who flinched as if I had struck her. "And you," I said, my voice dropping even lower. "You talk about Diane. Don't you ever speak her name again. You saw this house, her legacy of love and sacrifice, and you saw nothing but an asset. You saw me, and you saw nothing but a bank. You didn't just disrespect me. You desecrated her memory every single day you lived under that roof." I looked back at my son, at the broken man he now was. "So, no, I am not taking your home. I am reclaiming my wife's legacy from people who were unworthy of it. This isn't a punishment. This is a consequence. The world you thought you were entitled to is gone. Now, for the very first time in your life, you get to build your own. Good luck." And with that, I turned my back on them. I walked away, my footsteps steady on the gravel path, leaving them standing there by the silent lake, utterly and completely broken. I did not look back. There was nothing left to see. I didn't ask about them. I didn't need to. In the weeks that followed, whispers found their way to me, carried on the currents of old family friends and concerned acquaintances. The picture they painted was a bleak one. Andre and Brittany had been forced to leave the beautiful sunlit house on Chestnut Lane and move into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, one that sat above a noisy laundromat. The big SUV was sold, the fancy furniture put into storage they could barely afford. Their world had shrunk overnight from a sprawling kingdom to a tiny, suffocating box. But the loss of the house was nothing compared to the loss of their illusion. The bond that had united them, their shared sense of entitlement and their mutual goal of managing me had dissolved the moment their comfortable life vanished. Now I heard there were no more shared smiles or secret glances. There was only a heavy, suffocating silence punctuated by bitter arguments. The blame was a third person living in that tiny apartment with them. He blamed her for pushing him for poisoning his mind against me. She in turn despised him for his weakness, for failing to secure the lifestyle she believed she was owed. Their partnership, they discovered, had never been built on love. It had been a business arrangement, a merger of his access to my resources and her ambition. When I liquidated the company's main asset, their union was rendered bankrupt. They had stood together so strongly in their disrespect for me. Now they were trapped together in the prison of the consequences, forced to look at each other every day and see nothing but the reflection of their own failure and greed. The beautiful house was gone, and all they had left was the ugly truth of what they had become. A month later, I was back in David Chen's office. The atmosphere was completely different. There were no heavy files detailing property lines or legal authorities on the desk. Instead, there was a single new folder, and the documents inside felt lighter, filled with promise instead of conflict. David slid the final page across the polished mahogany towards me. At the top of the page, in elegant script, were the words, "The Diane Bishop Scholarship Fund." David looked at me, a question in his eyes. "Are you sure about this?" "Ray, all of it. You've earned the right to a comfortable retirement. You don't have to give this all away." I picked up the pen, its weight feeling different in my hand this time. "This money was tainted, David," I said, my voice steady and clear. "It was built with love, but it got poisoned by greed. I can't find any joy in it for myself, but I can clean it. I can turn it back into what Diane and I always intended our life's work to be, a foundation for the next generation." I explained the terms we had drafted. The fund would provide full scholarships for underprivileged African American students who wanted to attend trade schools for carpentry, plumbing, and electrical work, or for those who dreamed of studying construction and architecture at the local university. It was a fund to build builders. It was a way to give other young people the start that Diane and I had to fight so hard for. I signed my name at the bottom of the page. The signature wasn't an act of taking something away, it was an act of giving back. With that single stroke of the pen, a house that had become a symbol of disrespect was transformed into a future for dozens of kids who deserved a chance. My revenge was never about destroying my son. It was about protecting my wife's legacy. And in that quiet office, I realized I had done more than just protect it. I had given it new life. I stood across the street from the local university's School of Architecture, a new wing of the building glinting in the autumn sun. Inside, there was a small plaque on the wall announcing the first recipients of the Diane Bishop Scholarship Fund. I didn't go in. I didn't need the recognition. It was enough just to know it was there. I thought about the path that had led me to this moment. The anger, the pain, the terrible necessary decisions. I had lost a son. That is a grief that will live in a quiet corner of my heart forever. But in his place, I had created a new opportunity for hundreds of sons and daughters I would never meet. Andre had made his choice, and I had made mine. In the end, a man isn't defined by the things he owns, but by the things he is willing to fight to protect. I fought for my dignity. I fought for the memory of the woman I loved. The cost was higher than any house could ever be worth. But this feeling, this quiet, solid peace in my soul, was not something I had felt in years. It was the peace of a man who had finally put his world back in order. And that peace, that was priceless. For years, I believed a father's love had to be unconditional. I confused enabling my son's weakness with showing my own strength, and I paid a heavy price. This journey taught me a vital lesson: true love cannot flourish where respect has died. Maintaining peace by sacrificing your dignity is not peace. It is a slow surrender. I learned that the hardest boundaries are often the most necessary, and that protecting your own self-worth is not selfish. It is the essential foundation upon which any true and lasting legacy must be built. It is the greatest gift we can give ourselves. What would you have done in my situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below.